Okay, well, thank you, Stacy, and thank you, everyone, so far. You guys have all amazing. So much goes into this great service today, and it's amazing. I think that part of why God asked us to come together is because we grow so much in preparing and putting all things together and working together for the Lord. And all of us for hanging in there. I know this is one of our longest services of the year, and it's wonderful. So I'm going to share a word with us right now, a message here. And hang in there. There's coffee out there coming. We have a catered lunch, and it's coming soon. But Shana Tova to all of you, and a good year. Excuse me. At last night's service, for those of you who are there, I began a new series on the Sermon on the Mount. And as we begin the new year, again, 5784 we have closed our last year's theme, Etz Chaim Chi. It is a tree of life to those who take hold of it. And it was a wonderful theme last year, and we're moving now into our new strategic theme. And I love to just sort of introduce that on Rosh Hashanah. Our theme this year is our Ruach Israel voice. Our Ruach Israel voice. And we have a number of initiatives that I'm really excited about this year. Our board is really excited about them, and we'll be talking about those as we go through the weeks. But our first mission will be to enter deeply into the Sermon on the Mount. We'll study it. It's going to be part of our Chavruta project. Some of us will try to memorize it. At least that's a family project, and I invite you guys into it as well. Raina is going to write a song. Maybe Kyle and Rachel will write a song. Maybe Ken, I just mentioned to you. So let's enter into this in different ways. Gary, you told me you were going to dramatize the Sermon on the Mount. So in a couple months. Why? Why the Sermon on the Mount? Because if we asked Yeshua what our Messianic Jewish voice must sound like, what tone are we looking for? How do we practice? What qualities do we need to embody? What song should we sing? He might take us up a hilltop in ancient Israel overlooking the Sea of Galilee. And he might find a beautiful spot shaded under a small tree. And sitting down on a rock, he might draw us near. And then he might begin to teach. Truly happy are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Then he would teach us Messianic Jews about how to follow the way of Torah, his way. Always reconcile. Take the hit out of love. Remain faithful. Be kind no matter what. Love. Even your enemies. Forgive again and again and again. Never worry, but trust God. Give of what you have. Keep your focus on the kingdom of heaven. On him. Make him your rock. Make these words your foundation. This is what our Ruach Israel voice must sound like. So, let's open up our Bibles. If you could find your Tree of Life Bible here. There are some here. If not, Andrew, maybe you could pass some out. Just raise your hand if you'd like to follow along. And we're going to pick up in chapter 5 where we left off last night. Now, before we jump in today, let's just review a little bit of where we covered so far. These chapters in Matthew 7 were not called the Sermon on the Mount until the late 4th century. And Amy Jill Levine, in her commentary, retitles the Sermon on the Mount in a more descriptive way. A beginner's guide to the kingdom of heaven. A beginner's guide to the kingdom of heaven. So why study the beginner's guide to the kingdom of heaven on Rosh Hashanah? Because today we welcome the King. So let us prepare our hearts and our lives for what he has for us. Now, I shared last night that it was the Sermon on the Mount that won my heart for Yeshua. When I first read these words, it was as if the words lighted off the page and made their way inside of my soul. And then it changed me the way words on a page shouldn't ordinarily change a person. And it was as if the kingdom of heaven itself were trying to make its way inside. And the next day, I gave my heart and my life to Yeshua. I've never looked back. Yeshua isn't just teaching us how to be disciples in these chapters. He is making us disciples in these chapters. Now, last night we discussed the reason that these first verses are called the Beatitudes is just because they begin with the word blessed. Blessed are the poor in spirit, and so on. And this might not be the best translation for us. The Greek that Matthew uses, makarios, ties us back to the word Ashrei in the Torah. We looked at this more carefully last night. So we think of the prayer in our Siddur called the Ashrei from a mashup of Psalm 84 and 145. Ashrei Yoshvei Ve'teka od halaluka selah. Happy are those who dwell in your house, ever singing your praise. So Ashrei means happy, but it isn't quite so transient. It is a true happiness kind of happy, a full cup inside kind of happy, a sense of deep gladness and contentment and belonging and shalom, a joy that characterizes life in the kingdom of heaven kind of happy. So we're calling this section the Ashrei of Messiah. Let's read. Ashrei, or truly happy, are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Ashrei are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Ashrei are the meek, for they shall inherit the land. Ashrei are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Ashrei are the merciful, for they shall be shown mercy. Ashrei are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Ashrei are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Ashrei are those who have been persecuted for the sake of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Now, we covered the poor in spirit, the first verse, in some depth last night. And that will be recorded, and if you'd like to kind of get caught up, you can look at that later. But let's move on to verse 4. Ashrei, truly happy are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Now, Yeshua seems to be drawing here from Isaiah 61, actually, for a number of these Ashreis. These verses are about the great Jubilee Isaiah is writing about, in the day of Messiah. And these are the same words that Yeshua chanted aloud in the Nazareth synagogue when he came in and opened up the scroll, just like we did here. And he applied these words to himself. The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. And he continues, to comfort all who mourn, to provide for those who mourn in Zion, to give them a garland instead of ashes, the oil of gladness instead of mourning. Now, Yeshua's hearers were the Am Haaretz, the Jewish people of the land, and most of them listening that day were from the poorer regions of the Galilee. They were an oppressed people. They were trying to survive. They were familiar with suffering and well acquainted with death. It is to those people, those acquainted with loss, whom Yeshua offers deep words of comfort. In the kingdom of heaven, you are noticed. Your path and your pain is not in vain. Your grief means something of great value. Now, there are a lot of things that I love about being a rabbi. I couldn't list them all. I just love what I do and love being with you. But there are some things that, though difficult, are very, very special and very sacred to me. And one of the roles of a rabbi is to come alongside people who are mourning for a brief time, to carry a bit of the burden with them. And Rabbi Russ Resnick told me once, as we discussed Jewish pastoral care, that when you officiate for a funeral or sit with a family who is grieving, you don't just show up and leave, job done. You actually agree to carry a small amount of that pain, perhaps for some time. Because it is only for a time, and only in part, I experience this almost as a microcosm of the mourning to comfort journey. And so I find I need to go to my prayer swing for some time. And after some time, another day, inside I can feel the mourning transform to comfort in the presence of the Lord. Now, this is nothing compared to the grief those who have actually lost their loved ones feel. where this process happens over the course of a full Jewish year of mourning and even beyond. But nevertheless, I experience in a small way the process over a shorter time. And in the end, there is a deep sense of meaning in the transformation itself. Really, in Judaism, this is not about being a rabbi at all. Every Jew is called to be an agent for the kingdom of heaven. Every Jew is called to provide comfort, Bikor Cholim, visiting the sick and the suffering. We're all called to carry for a time each other's burdens. If it is every Jew who is called, then how much more us Messianic Jews to whom we have received this word and his comfort ourselves from the lips of our beloved Yeshua. Yeshua's words are not only for the mourners to hear, they are a call for us to give of ourselves, to become those agents in the kingdom and to provide comfort. We are to provide comfort in Yeshua's merit. This Ashrei is about hope for the stricken and hope for those with sadness. At the same time, it speaks to deeper values that are in the kingdom of heaven. Sadness is an emotion that God gave us to tell us that we've lost something of value. Mourning is extreme sadness, which tells us that we've genuinely loved in an extreme way, that we've genuinely treasured and valued someone whom God also treasures and loves. In a palpable way, the mourner has entered into life with God inside of our broken world. He mourns. Amy Jill Levine says this well, a Jewish commentator on the Sermon on the Mount. In part, those who mourn are blessed because not everyone can mourn. To mourn is to say, I loved this person and I desperately miss this person. A heart that knows how to grieve is a heart that knows how to love. Mourning is part of love in our broken world on this side of heaven, and love is what the kingdom of heaven is made of. Mourning is a holy emotion, not only because it reflects love, but also because it tears its robes and it screams at death. It isn't supposed to be this way. And then it looks to God for life, the only one who has the power to restore that love for all eternity. God hates death more than we do. God hates death more than we do. This is why Yeshua wept when Miriam was weeping with Lazarus after he had died, even moments before he resurrected him from the dead to life. Mourning actually points toward Yeshua because in Yeshua's death, in resurrection, we see that death isn't the end of the story. Yeshua has conquered death. Yeshua says to Miriam, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, even if he dies, shall live, and whoever lives and believes in me shall never die. He asks of us, do you believe this? Ashrei are those who mourn. Ashrei are those who look to him, for he will come and mourn with you. He will cry with you. And then, when the time is right, he will wipe away your tears. Mourning goes beyond the grieving loss of a loved one. There are lots of reasons to grieve in this world, but the application is the same. Real comfort is found in Yeshua's arms. Live God's life. Draw near to him. Trust him. Look to him for everything. Because in him is also the hope that brings Ashrei. Let's move to the next verse, verse 5. Ashrei, truly happy are the meek, for they shall inherit the land, or the earth. Now, theologians and thinkers devote pages and pages to try to define meekness. What does meekness mean? I think the key is to go back to Yeshua's source. Yeshua is likely quoting from Psalm 37, verse 11. It reads, "The wicked will be no more, but the meek shall inherit the land and delight themselves in abundant peace." Meek in Hebrew, in this verse in the Psalms, is anayim, from the root anan. The Greek word that Matthew uses for Greek is praos. And this is the same word that we see Second Temple scholars use, who translated the Hebrew Bible into Greek, called the Septuagint. They used praos for anan in Psalm 37:11. So they use the Greek word that Matthew uses when he quotes Yeshua talking about meekness. So it pulls us right back to that psalm. Now, in this case, anan is presented as the opposite of wicked. So something in this word connotes righteousness. But there's more to it. The same words again, anan in Hebrew and praos in the Greek Septuagint, are used to describe Moses in Numbers 12:3. Now the man Moses was very meek, or some say humble, more so than anyone else on the earth. Moses is described as anan or praos. Now while anan can mean the same thing as poor in spirit, the context from the Hebrew Bible shows us that poor in spirit refers more to the oppressed, the abused, the broken. This is what we talked about last night. While the meek here is something different, a different quality. Moses was not oppressed. Moses was not broken. Moses was a great and strong leader. We also find the same Greek word, praos, in Matthew 21:5. As Yeshua comes riding into Jerusalem on the donkey, Matthew quotes from the prophecy in Zechariah. "Tell the daughters of Zion, look, your king is coming to you, meek, praos, mounted on a donkey and on a colt, the foal of a donkey." Meekness seen through the lens that Matthew is using does not mean weak or insignificant. Instead, a meek person is a person with great authority who knows his authority, yet does not lord it over others. Moses, though a great leader of all of Israel, was a servant to all, willing to give of his own life for the people many, many times. Yeshua, though our king, comes on a donkey. The picture of Philippians 2. Though existing in the form of God, he did not consider being equal to God a thing to be grasped, but he emptied himself, taking on the form of a slave, becoming the likeness of men, and being found in the appearance as a man, he humbled himself, becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on the cross. For this reason, God highly exalted him. This is meekness. Now, Matthew also uses the same word, praos, to demonstrate Yeshua's comforting words in Matthew 11:29. "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am praos." I am meek, or gentle, or humble in heart. The idea is that Yeshua, though he has all the power and the authority, is available. He's compassionate. He's ready to enter in and experience what you experience in life. We might then say that meekness, the kind that inherits the land, means that a person who knows his or her high status in the kingdom of heaven, it means that you know how much you are loved, how much you are cared for, how much you are protected by the great king. And because of that knowledge, you have little need to puff yourself up or to look out for the interests of your own above others. Instead, out of your full cup, in your position of strength, you are available to others, meeting needs where you see them, jumping in to serve and ready to listen and be a support and a guide to others who are in need. So meek is different. Meek watches out for the poor in spirit. The meek will inherit the land. Now, most translators do not say land. They say the meek will inherit the earth. I think almost all English translations say this. It makes sense in one reading, the poor in spirit inherit the kingdom of heaven, so the meek should inherit the earth. But I've always wondered, are the meek less off than the poor in spirit? I mean, the earth versus the heavens? Like, what does that mean? I don't think it's the meaning. We need to go back to Psalm 37:11. The meek shall inherit the land and delight themselves in abundant peace and shalom. And a few verses later, the righteous shall inherit the land of Israel and live in it forever. The Hebrew word aretz can mean earth or land, But in the context of the psalm, it clearly refers to the land of Israel, not the earth, the land of Israel. And so all over the Psalms we see this. The righteous will dwell in the land of Israel. It means inheriting the promises that God has given to his people Israel. It's similar to the kingdom of heaven. Inherit the promise. We need to remember that Yeshua is a Jew, first speaking to Jews. He's telling these first century Jews, those who do not lord their power over others, which was the case with other groups, but you who don't lord your power over others, but instead you lead by sacrifice and by service and care for the people in your communities, you will be the ones to inherit God's greater promises to Israel. And this inheritance comes along with a great responsibility. And perhaps this is why the meek will inherit it, because they have already developed the true leadership qualities to care for the land. Inheriting the land requires care and concern for Israel's life, a safeguarding and a deep desire to preserve Jewish life, the life of the Jewish people and all of God's people who love him. It's a great responsibility. And now our next verse, verse 6, comes alive. Ashrei are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Now, in this world, men and women hunger and thirst and crave for all kinds of things, don't we? But now that we have stepped out of the systems of the world, we must internalize a new craving, a hunger and a thirst for the things of God. I'm thinking of Yeshua at the Samaritan well when his disciples come back with food after he's spoken to the woman. And they say, "Rabbi, eat. Aren't you hungry?" And Yeshua says, "I have food that you don't know about." "Well, what food do you have? Where did you get it? We've been starving all day." The disciples ask, "My food is to do the will of my Father in heaven." Now, it doesn't mean we don't eat or that we don't enjoy a good meal or that we don't enjoy the pleasures that God has created around us. Our Torah tells us that these things are made for joy. Remember, the kingdom of heaven is filled with joy. But it means that the deeper things that motivate us, even the things that motivate us towards joy, are things that are of our heavenly Abba's will. And so we see in the first three Ashreis of Messiah, poor in spirit, mourning, meekness, a striking comparison between the corrupt and oppressive systems of the world versus the values and life in the kingdom of heaven. The values and life of the kingdom of heaven must become our Ruach Israel voice. And Yeshua is asking that we exchange at the deepest levels of our identity the world's systems for happiness and success with God's values in the kingdom of heaven. It means that we must give up our hope of finding any Ashrei in ourselves and instead realize that Ashrei is found in the presence of God and among God's people with whom you are inseparably a part of, and for us here, our larger Ruach Israel family. And even more, it means thinking less and less about our own Ashrei and instead becoming agents of the kingdom of heaven to seek the needs of others, to alleviate the suffering of others, to find the Ashrei for others. Ashrei are those who care deeply for the spiritual well-being of the lost and spend time helping others hear and better live the good news that Yeshua is telling us about. Ashrei are those who spend time praying and interceding for the suffering. Ashrei are those who visit the sick and sit with those who are dying. Ashrei are those who make meals for those in need, whether times of joy, like a birth, or times of sorrow. Ashrei are those who love the children and invest in them by teaching Shabbat school. Ashrei are those who drive countless hours and hours to invest in building our small but important Messianic Jewish synagogue. Some of you drive up to an hour and a half every week to come. That's Ashrei. Ashrei are those who selflessly serve others in the kitchen through hospitality. Ashrei are the mothers who have given everything for their children. Ashrei are the fathers who are committed and present even in their weakness at times. Ashrei are those who have heard the voice of the Lord calling deep within and have said, "Yes, Lord, I am willing." And we'll end with just a brief word about the merciful, that they should receive mercy themselves. Now, of course, over the course of preparing this study, I've realized something that hadn't occurred to me before. There's a reason that mercy is next on the list. It has to do with Jonah. Jonah is a book about the two sides of righteousness, justice, and mercy. I'll leave that, come to our study on Jonah on Yom Kippur afternoon, and we'll unpack that and flesh that out because we study it for some time. On the one side, a hunger and thirst for righteousness in Judaism is a passion for justice. It's a desire to protect and care for the oppressed, to shelter them from the wicked, and a passion to see God's righteousness lived out on earth. But far too often, men lose sight of the deeper values of the kingdom of heaven, and justice becomes a tool for their own control, or worse, a weapon for revenge. Justice and mercy need to always go together. And many of the religious leaders that were in control of the temple, the Iudaioi, had fallen into this trap. And later in Matthew, Yeshua wields heavy criticisms of these leaders. The woes, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you tie up heavy burdens hard to bear and lay them on people's shoulders, but you yourself are not willing to move them with a finger. For the sake of their righteousness, they required men to pay a temple tithe, but what they missed was the impact. It meant that poor and suffering families could not care for their own aging parents. Yeshua calls this out in Mark 7. They had neglected mercy with their justice. Or consider the woman caught in adultery in John 8, Yochanan 8. The men drag her to Yeshua. They demand justice. She was caught in the act. They say she must be stoned. But Yeshua kneels to the ground and is overcome with mercy. And maybe he asks, where was the man? What about her broken past? Who's looking at her? And then he says, whichever of you have not sinned, you throw the first stone. And they walk away from the oldest to the youngest. Mercy sees the broken human condition as an integral part of justice and righteousness. Mercy allows us to sit in a mess and love someone who's really messed up big time. And love someone even though it never should have been that way. And love someone even though we were hurt. That's mercy. And I like to say that Yeshua is the face of God's mercy. So our Messianic Jewish voice must seek after righteousness in the things of God, but we must always have a tilt toward mercy, a tilt toward compassion, understanding the human condition, and understanding that life sometimes is just complex and difficult. Well, we have covered just the first 5 of the Ashreis in Messiah, and we must close. And I hope that you've seen that there's something sequential in this list. The poor in spirit understand the human condition deeply and are moved to mourn. The comfort experienced through mourning moves a person toward the deeper levels of humility and love that are required for meekness. That love from meekness leads a person to become so dependent on God that he or she begins to hunger and to thirst for righteousness and becomes consumed with living after God's will. Righteousness then demands justice, but justice improperly wielded brings oppression, and so one is required to cultivate mercy, to remember the poor in spirit and the brokenness around them. And then the people who make it this far become pure in heart. They no longer have any interest or need for the distractions or the clutter or the temptations of this world because they have too much to do already, because they see the need around them and they know God's heart. And then the pure in heart, they become peacemakers. Now they are truly children of God, Yeshua says, because they partner with God in his work in the world. Of course, peacemakers will disrupt the old world system. People won't like it. And over throughout the course of history, we see the peacemaker becomes persecuted for the sake of righteousness. So these all take us back to the beginning, because the persecuted inherit the kingdom of heaven, just like the poor in spirit. And so we cycle back around again and again and again. So let us go back to that grassy hilltop, sitting with Yeshua under the small tree. And he pauses for a few moments. The Galilean sea breeze shimmers the tall grass around you, and you hear birds calling in the distance in his silence. He's speaking to you. Even in this pause, it's as if he's speaking inside, saying something like, "Here is the beginner's guide to my kingdom. Do this and you'll find that my kingdom is available to you now. Come to me and you'll realize that it has always been right here. All around you. You just need me in your heart to see clearly." Yeshua says, "I am your Ruach Israel voice." And then Yeshua stands up and he raises his hands and he says to the ever-growing crowds, "Now go, you are the light of the world." Lashana Tova, everyone. Tekiah. Shvarim Teruah. Tekiah. Tekiah. Shvarim Teruah. Tekiah. Tekiah. Shvarim Teruah. Tekiah. Tekiah. Shvarim. Tekiah. Shvarim. Tekiah. Tekiah. Shvarim. Tekiah. Tekiah. Teruah. Tekiah. Tekiah. Teruah. Tekiah. Tekiah. Teruah. Tekiah. Tekiah.
Shvarim Teruah. Tekiah. Tekiah. Shvarim. Tekiah. Tekiah. Teruah. Tekiah Gedolah. Yasher Koach.